How's it going, everybody? So today I want to show you a pretty cool and really quite ingenious gadget, the AGA Tools jack rod, that'll give your floor jack the safety and security of a jack stand. So when using a floor jack, we typically use the floor jack to lift the load, then we place a jack stand in somewhere, and then we drop the load and let it rest on the jack stand instead of the jack itself. And why do we do that? Well, if we look at the jack itself, you have this hydraulic ram, and by leaving the load on the jack, especially for an extended period of time, that's a lot of pressure on the various seals. And in the worst case, you have a seal fail, and then the jack, drops your load. And if you don't have a jack stand under there, well, you've just kind of dropped your car. So what the AGA Tools jack rod allows you to do is it allows you to support the load mechanically, like a jack stand, without actually needing that separate jack stand on another part of the car. And the way this works is you take the jack rod, you place it on the front axle of your jack here, and then you can release it, spring-loaded, and just like that, it'll go onto the axle of the actual jack lifting mechanism. And when you lower the jack, then it'll load it and get locked into place on one of the detents. So let me go ahead and just release this jack. So now we've released all of the hydraulic pressure on the jack itself, so those seals and whatnot are no longer loaded, and the weight, the load is purely being supported by the jack rod. And we've done this only using the same lifting point that the original jack was used to lift the car. We haven't needed to put a jack stand anywhere else. Now, the jack rod isn't a perfect tool, and unfortunately there are some floor jacks with which it will not work. So here I have a Harbor Freight 1.5 ton lightweight jack, and unfortunately the jack rod won't work with this for two reasons. One, the support cup up top isn't narrow enough, right? This has to rest on this axle or this pin up here, and well, it's close, but it doesn't actually fit between the metal on each side. This thing is 2.5 inches wide. The other compatibility issue with a jack like this is it doesn't have a bare front axle. Instead, it has this roller, and the roller is too large in diameter. So I mean, sure, you can put the bottom of the jack rod on there, it feels secure. But what happens is this roller is not touching this flat bottom part of the cup. Instead, it's resting on the two ears. So obviously, that's not where you want to be loading this, because, well, it's possible the ears could split and, bend outwards with enough force, and that's not ideal. So, when I measured this, it seems like the largest axle diameter that you could, safely use with this is about 28 millimeters or 1 1/8 inch. So if you have, an axle up to that large, then that's still large enough where that axle is going to be resting on the base part of the cup and not on the two ears. If we look at the 2-ton version of that jack, however, we can see, it has an exposed front axle, and, well, it is plenty wide at the axle or pin up at the top. So there is no issue using the jack rod with the 2-ton class of jacks. So make sure you have a jack compatible with the jack rod before you go out and buy it. So that means, a lower axle of less than 1 1/8 inch in diameter, and a top pin space area of at least 2.5 inches. So let's go ahead and see how this works. Once again, I've taken the jack, I've lifted my load, then with a single hand I can place the jack rod, press the lever to extend it, right? It's not locked into place at this point, not until I lower my jack. And we see this pin lock into place. So now everything is all supported by the jack rod, not the jack itself. I go and do my task. When I'm all done, I can go ahead and raise the jack, right? Freeing the jack rod, and I can also press the lever and compress it and take it out. And then I can just lower things as normal. Now, one of the really nice things about that spring is that I can place it and remove it with just a single hand, right? So once again, there, it springs and it holds itself into place. I don't have to use two hands, one to hold the lower part, press the lever, and the second to extend this middle part, because that spring does that conveniently for me. So I have made one modification to the jack rod, and that is I've gone ahead, you can see here, I've cut this upper cup here And I've only removed about 1/8 inch to 3/16 inch material. But what that allows it to do is this now allows it to fit in these nice little 1.5 ton jacks. So, between the ears of this upper support. And I like to take these smaller 1.5 ton lightweight aluminum jacks to the track with me because, well, they're compact and they're lightweight. And quite frankly, I don't really need more than 3,000 pounds lifting capacity. So, this is just one modification I've done to make this more usable for me. It was good to hear from AGA Tools that they are planning on making a slimmer cup so that you won't have to do this in the future. But it's not that hard to cut off it. A little bit of material with either a grinder or a Dremel yourself. All right, so let's take this thing apart to see a little bit more of the design. It looks like over here you have these two 1/8 inch hex screws, and these look like they secure a little stop piece so that it prevents this extendable portion from coming out all the way. So let's go ahead and remove these two screws. And then you can see this little piece came out here, so that looks like a stop. And yep, sure enough, if we release the pin over here, and this center port part came out, you can see there's a stopper piece over on the end of it. Okay, looking on the inside here, I don't know how you can see that. You can see there's another two screws that screw into this little block piece. And then also inside the center here, you can see that there is a guide rod for this spring. And wow, this spring is actually quite long, as you can see. Obviously it's not super strong, but it doesn't need to be in order to move this piece out and up. Looking at the main body, you can see it's a piece of a square stock or rectangle stock anyhow. And interestingly, there's another tube in here that looks the guide rod from here goes into. So it means this spring has a guide rod the entire length of this piece, which is kind of cool to see. And this one is more of a tube, right? Versus this side is a rod. So you can see the rod obviously fits inside the tube. And we can also see the little pin here, right? And that is what's supporting the load when it's locked into these various detents along the extendable piece here. So taking a look at the end cup here, we can see, right, it's welded, and these are pretty clean welds. There's not a bunch of standing material. It doesn't look really crappy or anything. So it's really nice to see some quality done here. One of the things that I asked AGA Tools is, if they would make a modular end cap, or end cup rather, right? Because once again, this is about 2.5 inches wide, which is too wide to fit on some light duty 1.5 ton jacks, the kind that are really compact, lightweight, and easy to take to the track. And luckily they did tell me they were going to make a narrower version of these cups available. That said, since it's welded, you'd probably have to buy this entire piece, or just buy a version of the jack that naturally came with it. For me, I'm probably going to chop off a little bit of the ends of this upper cup so that I can use one of those smaller 1.5 ton jacks. Interestingly, I think in one of their prototype designs they did have a modular cup, but the cost of making that piece modular, having a bolt here to secure it and swap it out, was a little bit more expensive than they would have liked. So kind of sad to see that, but on the other hand, if they make replacement cups for us, or replacement shafts and cups, then that may resolve the issue. On the bottom side, I don't think there's nearly as much opportunity for a modular design, mainly because if you look at this here, when it goes all the way, this is bottoming out at the bottom. So if you were to try and do a modular design, then that would mean the minimum this would be able to collapse is about that much. So it means this would be that much longer just in its minimum state. If you are using a roller or some other type of shaft that's too big for this cup, I guess what you could also do is you could also put plates, metal plates here to shim this up and outwards, so that the bottom of whatever big roller you're using touches that, which is essentially the base of it, instead of resting on the ears here. So that would make it safe, but obviously then you have less margin for slipping and coming off of that shaft or not. So anyways, you can see this is actually, very simple design. It doesn't really look like it needs any maintenance. It's not like you have to put grease along the rails of here or anything. Maybe the only thing you would consider greasing is this pin right here that slides in and out, which you could do from this open side right here. But other than that, you really shouldn't need to do any maintenance on this product. So I'm going to go ahead and put this back together. So we'll take the spring, look at this guide tube here, get that over. Then I'll go ahead and get that started on the upper piece and make sure that I turn these open detent sides to the right side. Go ahead and get this spring on there. Whoops, here we go, come on. Gotta capture the spring a little bit as I get these two parts together. Make sure to get the tube in the hole, or at least got a feel for that. Get the lever there. So now everything here is captured, right? The pin's in the detent, the tube is in, the rod and the upper piece is in the tube in the lower part. And then I can go ahead and slide the blocker piece back in, and then go ahead and get those two screws back in there. This blocker piece goes in this way. We can go ahead and take those 1/8 inch hex screws and fasten that. And there we go. Jack rod is all back together. So one of the other things, looking at the external markings of the jack rod is, you see a sticker here saying max load 2 tons, right? So that means this can support 4,000 pounds on its own. And believe it or not, when I asked AGA Tools if they had any interesting product plans for this, it sounded like they were thinking of an even heavier duty version, so greater than 2-ton capacity. So I think, maybe that's going to be targeted more at, the light truck or pickup market, maybe even off-road. They're starting to do these off-road floor jacks, with the big knobby wheels on your regular floor jack. And so if you're off-roading and you got to swap a wheel, maybe a, heavy-duty one of these is actually just right for that application, because then you can jack up your rig and, slap this into the jack and not have to worry about putting a farm jack or something anywhere else. If you just want to use a floor jack instead. So typically when I go to the track and I'm swapping my wheels, I'll just put a jack under one of the front or rear lifting points, jack up this whole side of the car, so you can see the front wheels off the ground, right? You can see the rear wheels off the ground as well. And then in the other jack point, I'll go ahead and put a jack stand. Well, the nice thing is with the jack rod, I can just go ahead and install this in the jack itself, lower that onto the jack rod, and I don't need that other jack stand anymore. So now I've got the safety and security of a jack stand like I normally would, without having to put another jack stand over here, make sure that's aligned as I'm lowering the jack and the car onto it. And really that convenience factor is what sold me on the AGA Tools jack stand. When I saw it, it was just, mind-blowing. Like, how could something so simple not be out there already? And, it just makes things so convenient. And once I'm done swapping wheels, brake pads, whatever, I can just go ahead and take my jack it up a little bit more, take the jack rod out, and then lower the car like normal. So at the end of the day, what do I think of the AGA Tools jack rod? Well, honestly, I'm impressed. They managed to make something that's very simple conceptually, easy to use, and very convenient. That said, there are going to be some naysayers, and they're probably going to balk at the price when they first see it. And I'm going to say, they have a point. For the price of the AGA jack rod, you could buy a cheap jack and full set of jack stands. That said, you can't think of this purely in terms of the material cost, because what I am valuing here is the convenience of the tool. I mean, look at this quick jack here. One of my all-time favorite tools I have, and you could just as easily accomplish what you do with a quick jack as you could with jacks and jack stands. So for me, convenience is worth something, and the AGA tools jack rod really offers that. I'm very looking forward to taking this to the track with me, not having to put an extra jack stand under the car when I'm swapping wheels, brakes, whatever, and just using that and getting ready to go. So happy I have this.